they, meaning the left or the media, they're after you,
Yeah.
pointing to his supporters. The media has gone after Trump supporters as a group, just sort of is a name, as in a mass of people, and they have also gone after people individually. Throughout human history, it is never the good guys who are doing the censoring. This was a platform that had banned Donald Trump. They eliminated his account back in 2020 while he was the sitting president of the United States.
Hello, welcome back to the Brussels Signal Studio. I'm here today with Tim Murtaugh. Thanks for finding some time for coming in.
You
Tim.
bet. Happy to be here. Thank you.
And Tim is, or was rather, senior advisor to the Trump campaign last year, 2024. He was also communications director to the Trump campaign in 2020. Now, Tim has been here in Brussels. He has just given a presentation at an event we did this week on why Trump won. Now, we videoed that presentation and we're going to put it online. So we're going to use this interview to drill down into a couple of other issues. But let's just sum it up. According to what I recall from your presentation, basically, you said Trump was a great candidate. Kamala Harris was a horrible candidate. So in the end, it was easy, right?
Well, no, I didn't say it was easy. No. But I mean, you have the gist of it right. I think the recipe for a tremendous triumphant win, which is what I think Donald Trump turned in on November 5th of 2024. The recipe is to have a great candidate who has a strong, clear vision of what he wants to do if he is elected, to be able to articulate specifically what it is that he would do, and then also have the energy and charisma to be a great candidate out there. So Donald Trump had it all. Strong candidate, clear vision, lots of energy, never ever rested. He's a dream candidate for anybody who works on a campaign. And then I always say to people that I encounter in politics, may you always be blessed by having terrible opponents. And we had an opponent in Kamala Harris, and had it been Joe Biden before her, I think it would have ended up much the same, but she was an awful candidate. She had no clear message. There was no real clear idea among the population of America what it is exactly that she was running on. She was unable to separate herself from the Joe Biden record, and even though she desperately needed to, because the record was terrible, and she didn't even really try. And in the end, she was a terrible campaigner. She had struggled to get her message through to even the friendliest of media, which in America is most of it for her side, is most of the media is friendly. And she turned out to be awful. And then when you couple that with having a candidate as strong and as good as Donald Trump, then you end up getting a decisive victory. And there were 7 battleground states that everybody focused on. They were no secret. It was Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona, if the names of the states mean anything to Europeans. And the battle was going to be fought over who won the majority of those 7 states. And it turns out that Donald Trump won all 7. And so in the end, it was quite a decisive victory, and it was pretty amazing.
And an expected victory, I guess, because in your presentation, you mentioned that one moment where Trump went to McDonald's to serve fries, as you say over there, chips, we say in England, and the roads were lined with supporters, which was not expected. That was a moment when you knew.
In my own mind, yes. I wouldn't say that the victory was expected, I think, is a little too strong. Okay. I think because it felt like a tough fight, and you never know how it's going to happen until the votes are actually counted. But at the beginning of October, our own internal polling showed that Donald Trump had gone ahead in all 7 of those battleground states that I just showed. We issued a memo to talk about that and told the media, hey, our own numbers show that we're ahead. They were not acting like that. The media was not acting like that. They really were definitely most of the mainstream media was on the side of Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And we were trying to tell them, what we're seeing inside here is that Donald Trump is ahead. That was the beginning of October, so that's 1 month before Election Day. And then our polls showed that Trump was consistently ahead in all 7 of those states every single week throughout the course of the final month of the campaign. And we kept telling the media, hey, we're winning. By our own numbers, we're winning. And I don't think they were listening. And so when he went to that McDonald's, and it was October 20th, I think, so about 2 weeks before Election Day, you're right, the streets were lined with 10,000 people, and it was an organic crowd. We did not build that crowd. A local newspaper had reported which McDonald's he was going to be appearing at, and the people just showed up. And this was at the end of a 9-year campaign by the media and Democrats to try to make supporting Donald Trump something that people should be ashamed of, to try to drive Trump supporters into the shadows and out of the spotlight and out from where people could even see you. And the fact that 2 weeks before the election, here were 10,000 people who showed up on their own to show their support for a guy, just to watch him arrive to go make French fries inside of a McDonald's. To me, that was proof that the 9-year messaging campaign of the Democrats had utterly failed.
And the Democrats and mainstream media, as you've just said, I mean, because that leads me on to the media question, which is, to what extent does mainstream media in the US actually move the needle?
I don't think they do. I don't think they move the needle. I think that most Americans can see that they have an agenda. 60 Minutes, for example, is a mainstream American news magazine that's on Sunday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday nights. It's been on for decades, and everyone knows about it. And they were caught during the campaign favorably editing an interview that they conducted with Kamala Harris. They shortened her answer. She's famous for she's the world-renowned chef of word salads, and she uses a fantastic number of words to say absolutely nothing, and it's meandering and it's confusing, and they edited her answers down to make them sound less incoherent than they actually were. And there was a public call, the campaign did, President Trump did, we all called, we released the full transcript. They released the full transcripts of other interviews that they did. Why not release the transcripts of your Kamala Harris interviews? What did you edit out, and why did you do it? Let us all see it. And they resisted. And it's because largely American mainstream media is in the tank for the left. And most people know it. And so they are a presence in the media landscape, and they're what we refer to now as the legacy media, the ones who have been around for long. The New York Times, the Washington Post, all of our broadcast networks, CNN, networks like that. And they have an agenda, and everyone knows their agenda. The people who agree with their agenda eat it up, and people on our side of the fence, Republicans or conservatives, we know that they are hostile to us, and we treat them as adversaries. They are necessary to deal with, and we do deal with them, but we don't take them seriously anymore. It used to be that we would fear what the New York Times would say about you. We don't fear that anymore. We largely just go, you're the New York Times, here, this is what we think, this is our answer, and we move on.
But is this what the American people increasingly think as well? Because obviously the effect of this 9-year campaign wasn't very strong, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was a failure. And the media was in on that too, the mainstream media, the legacy media. They were part of the Democrats' efforts to try to marginalize not only Donald Trump, but everyone who supports Donald Trump. And President Trump always says when he's speaking to a crowd, he always says they, meaning the left or the media, they're after you, pointing to his supporters, and I'm just in the way. And that's absolutely true, because the media has gone after Trump supporters as a group, just sort of is a name as in a mass of people, and they have also gone after people individually who are Trump supporters. And I think definitely people can see that and are aware of it. And fortunately or unfortunately, the situation in America now is that our media really is largely segmented. There is the legacy media, which is left of center, without question. And then there is an entire media ecosystem that is right of center. And I think that begins with Fox News, but there's also a tremendous amount of other new alternative media on the right side, lots of websites, the Daily Caller, Daily Wire, Breitbart News, a lot of different organizations like that. The Heritage Foundation spun off in a publication called the Daily Signal, very effective and in-depth, good reporting. There's lots of different, there's Rumble, which is an alternative, a competitor of YouTube. It's a free speech platform, really, but it does not censor people the way that YouTube censors people, and people get their news from that. X, the fact that Elon Musk purchased X, formerly Twitter, is massive change in the media landscape. People get news there, and people are no longer being censored the way they were.
Did it make a difference to the campaign?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because this is a platform that had banned Donald Trump. They eliminated his account back in 2020 while he was the sitting president of the United States, post January 6, 2021, this was post-election, they actually suspended the president of the United States. That's astounding. Astounding. Facebook did the same thing. And so because there was such overt censorship, there was already the existence of right of center media, but I think it breathed life into it. And it's very robust now.
Does censorship, those who practice censorship, essentially shoot themselves in the foot?
Well, I'll tell you, it's throughout human history, it is never the good guys who are doing the censoring. And so, yes, it shoots themselves in the foot. I mean, for example, I don't know if this is really the genesis of it, but there's you see a screenshot every once in a while of this conversation that happened on X where so it was a discussion going on among some users about the censorship that was happening on Twitter, as it was then known. And one guy said, you know what, Elon Musk should buy Twitter. And Elon Musk himself replied in this conversation and said, how much is it? And so I don't know if that was the genesis of it, but the rest is history.
Okay, and so these alternative new media during the campaign, what do you do with them? I mean, you cultivate relationships and what have you, but then what do you choose? I mean, obviously, Joe Rogan's show, I don't know if that counts as new anymore.
Well, I don't know if it's new anymore, but yeah. Yes, Joe Rogan, for example, has the largest audience of any media outlet anywhere. I don't know if it's worldwide or not, but in the United States, he has the largest audience, and it's not particularly close. And he has on guests. He doesn't take guest pitches. If you approach his producers and say, hey, I've got an idea, they're probably not going to listen to you. He has on his show the people that he wants to have, the ones that he finds interesting. And you have to also agree to be on there for 3 hours. Yeah. It's a long conversation. And Donald Trump went on and did the show. And it was a massive success. And it's not the sort of thing that they sort of had I don't know what the true story is, but they had a back and forth with the Harris campaign about her appearance on the show, and ultimately she never did appear, which I think was to her detriment, not going on the show. But I don't know if she wouldn't have been able to handle a 3-hour conversation without screwing up in some way, because she couldn't do short interviews either. But that was reaching an audience that you don't normally reach, that most politicians wouldn't go in and do 3 hours. And, because you sit for that long.
Too risky.
You don't know. Yes, terribly risky. You don't know where the conversation's going to go. But he also, not just Joe Rogan, other podcasts. There's one called the Nelk Boys, and there's some ones that, sports-oriented through the Barstool Network, which is another new media and podcasting. Online stuff, and then and Donald Trump is very comfortable talking about sports. Big sport, always been a big sports fan. Knows a lot of the famous athletes, as having been a guy who was of some prominence. In New York, he encountered a lot of athletes, and one podcaster is a comedian named Theo Von, excuse me, who he's funny and he has a very popular podcast, and Trump was on there, and they spent a significant amount of time talking about the issue of addictions with Theo Von.
Yes.
Has had problems with addiction himself, and Donald Trump, who does not drink at all, never has, but he blames, and because he does not drink, because he blames alcohol for the death of his brother. And they had a really heart-to-heart conversation, a very emotional, open conversation on this podcast about that topic. And it strikes me, too, because I'm an alcoholic in recovery for almost 10 years now.
You've written a book?
I wrote a book about it, yeah. It's called Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, and you can find it on Amazon, by the way. That sort of podcast appearance where Donald Trump, and he was not on there, it didn't seem like a campaign event. He was talking about his brother who had died, and Theo Von was talking about his own struggles with addiction. I mean, it was really, really remarkable. And you're not going to get that anywhere else.
He had the ability to be natural, to be himself, basically.
Yeah, and it's a long conversation like that. You can really stretch out, and you can talk about things that wouldn't normally come up during the course of a more condensed time period that you would have in traditional media. And it's a whole different audience, and I think that's the way the campaign we looked at, we were focused on, you want to get your diehard voters, let's say Republicans start with 45% of the vote, Democrats start with their own 45% of the vote, so that leaves 10% in the middle somewhere that you got to get. And we had them identified as low propensity voters, which is people who don't normally vote, and also persuadables, people who we thought were going to vote and had not really committed. So you want to go and both of those groups broke toward Donald Trump in numbers enough to make the election. But the low propensity voters, if you're talking about young people, people that you can reach through what method? These podcasts. And I think it was very successful.
So that's going to grow over time.
You would think so, yeah. And then, there's always something that comes next. Right now, it's podcasts.
Right.
And I think everybody has to be on the lookout for what the next wave is. But right now, the new frontier was podcasts. And now that the secret is out and Donald Trump had harnessed them, other people are following. And now, there's going to be on. First, in 2016, it was Facebook. Facebook was the new way to reach people. And then because Trump had been successful, Facebook changed the rules. And now you can't use it that way anymore. So whatever comes next beyond podcast.
Is there any sign as to what might be
I don't know. I hesitate to say that. So, although I do want to give credit to Barron Trump, the president's son, who was really one of the proponents who told his father, you ought to be on some of these podcasts. This is how you reach the people.
Okay, and so when it comes to these alternative media, you can just sort of let him go, can you? Just organize a date and...
Oh, yeah. Well, first, you're not going to control Donald Trump. If he's going to do the show, if he wants to do the show, he's going to go out there and he's going to manage the conversation the way he wants to manage the conversation. So, yeah, I mean, there's no choice but to just let him go. Because that's what he's going to do. He's in charge. There's no question of that.
Now, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about polling. I mention it because polling seems, at least to me, to have become a rather sordid affair since Brexit. I don't know if we could chase the origins back further, but there have been lots of surprises. The Romanian elections obviously were very surprising to everyone here in Europe because the winner was a complete surprise. It had come from nowhere. He was polling, I think, at about 2% prior to the first round of the elections that were cancelled. This is Mr. Georgescu. Anyway, what is going on with polling, in your opinion? Why are there so many surprises? It seems to be more in certain countries than others, but there seems to be a general trend.
Yeah, well, I mean, without being able to get under the hood and see if there had been any actual problems and mechanical breakdowns and why the polling didn't capture certain things or was in fact wrong or backwards, and maybe is one way to describe it. I don't know exactly what went wrong, but in the European polling, but in America, if these are parallels, let's going back to 2016. The first Trump election, which I think goes hand in hand with Brexit, really. The first Trump election back in 2016, in polling in America, like as in Brexit, it wasn't really captured. And what the results were about to be was not captured in public polling at all leading up to it. And so the results were a surprise to many people. Now, I wasn't there in 2016 on the Trump campaign. I was working in Congress in America at the time. But I know that the public polling had it wrong. They had Hillary Clinton winning handily, and that turned out to be way off. And because Trump won in a very hard-fought, close election. I think inside the Trump campaign, as I understand it now, they had an idea that it was going to be close, and they thought that it was leaning their direction, and that was because of data that they were getting from their performance of ads that they were placing on Facebook. And the data they were gathering from Facebook, because they placed hundreds of thousands of variations of ads on Facebook, and you can test them, what's working and what's not working. It's called A/B testing.
A/B test.
And so they were able to micro-target people very specifically down to what their interests were, and they were getting data back. And the campaign manager at the time, Brad Parscale, now, after the fact, it's easy to say this, but he claims that he was highly confident of victory based on what he knew was happening on Facebook and the way that the people were interacting. Now, Facebook changed the rules, and you can't micro-target like that anymore because the Trump campaign was successful. Had it been like, say, the Obama people harnessing Facebook to such great effect, they would have been on the cover of magazines as the new tech heroes and the new political generation of tech wizards. Instead, Brad became sort of a villain for having figured out how to use it. But so the polling had it wrong. And in America, we sort of attributed that to reluctant Trump supporters, not trusting pollsters, either not answering or not telling the truth. Or it could be the effect of, because there was such an onslaught of media, as we just discussed, about how the media tried to make it something to be ashamed of. if you were a supporter of Donald Trump, that even you're talking to a stranger who has called you on the phone to say who you're going to vote for in this election, they don't want to tell the person that because they feel like, oh my gosh, this person's going to judge me if I tell them who I really support. And so there is this aspect of the hidden Trump supporter that polling does not pick up. And I think that's a phenomenon that still exists. But back in 2016, I think it was definitely there. And I think probably the same phenomenon was happening with Brexit polling because that was a surprise to people on the world stage. But I'll bet the people who were inside the Brexit movement would tell you that they saw it coming, even if the public polling didn't, because I'm sure they had other ways of trying to measure what the support was at the time.
Have the ways of measuring support changed? I mean, obviously there's the Facebook data that you mentioned, but I mean, otherwise it's still calling people up and saying...
Yeah, well, it's calling and it's online polling. There's different methods and mixed methodology, and I know that they keep adjusting it. Trying to make sure that it's as accurate as possible.
Because it's clearly not accurate anymore. I'm wondering if the whole thing
no,
needs
I wouldn't say that they're all inaccurate. I think the public polling this last time was not horribly off, I think, for the most part, but it was different enough from our own internal polling. Tony Fabrizio was the lead pollster for Trump in 2024, in 2020, and along with I worked with another guy for a long time, John McLaughlin, two guys who are really pros. But Tony Fabrizio, he was the one that I referenced that Tony's numbers had Trump ahead in the 7 battleground states beginning at the beginning of October, and the national news media in America heading into the final days of the campaign and into election night, I think they all thought, they were under the impression that it was going to be a nail biter. That's the way that the media was, it's basically a coin flip election is what they were talking about. But we internally felt very good that our numbers, if Tony was right, that our numbers had Trump ahead and winning, and it was Tony started talking about being able to know who won because the media had been preparing people. Oh gosh, we might not know who won for a week. It could take 10 days after the election. Everybody get ready. It might take a while. It could be a bumpy ride. We don't know. Everybody strap in. But Tony was saying, if things break our way, we'll there's a good chance that we'll know on election night that we won. And on election night, I was at the West Palm Beach Convention Center on election night, and a reporter from the Washington Post, it was about 10:30 at night, and it wasn't over yet, but it was quite obviously trending in that direction in all of the 7 battleground states. And this reporter came over and said, did you guys see this coming? This early win, this decisive win, did you see it coming? And I was, a little bit frustrated. Like, we've been telling you for the last month. I know that you're used to campaigns sort of blowing smoke, but we were telling you the truth. That if Tony was right, and he was right that Trump was ahead in all 7 of these battleground states, we knew that it was a distinct possibility that it would be a sizable, decisive victory in all 7 of those states, and that it would be over tonight. Well, Tony was right.
And talk a bit about election night then, because you've experienced one or two, haven't you? Well,
yeah.
It was a bit different.
It's let me tell you, it's always better to win. It is so much better to win. I remember standing in the convention center when it was over, and we were waiting for the president to come on stage to deliver his victory remarks, and I was standing with a young lady who worked on the campaign, Sonny Nelson, and I turned to her and I said, boy, it is so much better to win. And just savoring it, and just because we had all been through, and many of the people in that room had been, on the Trump campaign and just as supporters since 2015. And that's a long time, nearly a decade. And it just felt like just a tremendous triumph, and the perseverance and everything that, people really do feel like they went through everything that Trump did, being along with him for that ride. Now, not all of them survived an assassin's bullet like he did. But, they felt like they had lived and sweated and bled with him along the way. And just the immense feeling of pride and success and accomplishment of being in that room and feeling like you finally had done it, and after all the hard work had finally paid off in that tremendous victory. It's a feeling that was almost indescribable, really, because I've been on the other side enough times to know what losing feels like, and it's way better to win.
And you're working with other candidates now, is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always have. I have my own firm. It's called Line Drive Public Affairs, and I advise office holders and candidates, always conservatives, Republicans and conservatives. And I'd love to branch out and be helping people internationally as well, which I think is opening up a possibility by being here with you in Brussels. I think that's of great help. But I also advise and help out private sector companies as well. My favorite private sector client right now is Rumble, which is in the news a lot, and they just filed a lawsuit against the Supreme Court justice from Brazil over what we believe is illegal attempts to censor American-based users of the platform. Just filed a suit in court in Florida just yesterday, as a matter of fact. Also, Strive Asset Management is another good one. It's an investment fund founded by Vivek Ramaswamy, who has been a prominent fixture around Trump world and ran for president himself, and has, I think, a bright political future. And so, things like that, I think it's good to be able to. Those are private sector clients, but they're sort of politically adjacent, if you know what I mean.
I do. And talk a bit more about Rumble then. What's going on in the Brazil case?
The Supreme Court Justice, De Moraes, is a guy who has been very much an opponent of free speech, and he has attempted to successfully, in some cases, censor various people on social media because they
X as well, right?
X as well,
right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the case of Rumble, he had previously ordered the censoring of certain channels and certain users of Brazilian-based. In some cases, some people who had fled Brazil to the United States because of the onerous censorship demands by the Supreme Court justice, who had an incredible amount of power and influence in Brazil. And so rather than acquiesce to the censorship demands, Rumble just said, we're not going to do that. We'll just turn off access to Rumble in Brazil. Oh. And so no one in Brazil was able to use Rumble because the Supreme Court justice had demanded censorship, and they said, we're not going to pull down just regular users. We're just going to turn it all off. Sorry. And then so recently they relented, and it was sort of inexplicable. They just said, all right, we drop our demands of censorship. So Rumble turned the switch back on and said, okay, people can use it in Rumble again. And then almost immediately, the Supreme Court justice issued another demand to Rumble to censor and pull down one specific user of a guy who his name is Dos Santos, former priest and an independent journalist who had fled to Florida, fled Brazil to Florida, and had done some content that this Supreme Court justice didn't like. And so he said, I want you to pull down that channel, that one specific channel. And Rumble said, no, and you're attempting to interfere now with U.S.-based content, and you don't have the authority to do that. And so now they've gone to court to fight the guy.
Have they responded, the Brazilians?
I don't know that they've responded yet. The suit was only filed yesterday.
Okay,
so
that's news.
I doubt that I doubt that they've had a chance to file that. But I love Rumble. I love Strive, and I think those are, two great companies, and they in Strive Asset Management, what they do is they try to steer. They're an investment firm, and they of course invest in publicly traded companies, and then they use those stakes in those companies to attempt to steer the companies away from ESG management principles and DEI principles, and say what you should be doing if you are a publicly traded company. Your concern should be building the value of that company to benefit the shareholders, the people who own the company. If you are pursuing all of these social policies that actually harm the value of your company, you are doing a disservice to your shareholders, and that's not appropriate. That's not proper. So they'd use their position to try to steer companies in the right way to maximize value of the company for shareholders. So I think it's a novel concept. Try to make money for the people who have invested their money in you. That's crazy, I know.
So when you have a prospective candidate, let's say you pick up someone on your European tour, or maybe more than one, and you're talking to them, I mean, there must be times when your heart sinks, surely, in the sense that some candidates, not every candidate has the charisma, quote unquote, of someone like a Donald Trump. Is there anything you can do with a boring candidate?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a broad question. First, I should say that Donald Trump is one of one. There is no one, and I don't think you'd get any arguments from anybody, even those who don't like Donald Trump. There ain't nobody like Donald Trump. No one. So, trying to draw any comparison for any candidate to Donald Trump is really not fair to that candidate. But I think that there's always something. If I'm going to be talking to a candidate, it's probably because that I agree with them on ideologically and broad. I don't have to agree with every single thing that they stand for or that's in their record or that they would run on as a candidate for whatever office they would seek. But I need to agree with them in large part, in broad strokes, in general ideology.
Be on board.
Right, to be on board. I would find it extremely difficult to work for a liberal politician unless I were there to try to coax them to, perhaps repackage some of the things that they were trying to sell. But I would have to agree ideologically. And then I think mostly what I could bring really would be how to talk about what it is. Even if you are boring and don't have the best charisma, you can still control the words that you use and the language and the way that you argue and the way that you cast things and frame things. And I think to take in the opposing arguments to whatever it is that your position is, and be able to more effectively parry and argue back. I think my longtime friends going back to grammar school and all that would probably agree that I've always been somewhat argumentative in my life. And so I think, just effective debating about I think that's always able.
You teach these skills to prospective candidates?
I think I coach and have media training, but also debate prep and how to take certain, like opposition research is a very effective tool. I don't know how pervasive it is in Europe, but to know what your opponent's record is. And so when they say A, you say B. And so that sorts.
So they have a response prepared.
Right. And yes, and anticipate what the incoming attacks will be or the incoming criticisms and how you answer. If they attack you on this, then you change the subject to that because it's much, teaching them how to get back to friendlier ground. You don't have to, and especially with media, my main piece of advice that I always tell, and I didn't invent this, I picked this up somewhere along the way, but it's really the best advice I've ever heard, and so I keep returning to it. If you are in an interview, and Donald Trump does this to masterful effect, and so does J.D. Vance, who's the vice president now, when you're in an interview setting and it's going to be hostile, always answer the question that you wish had been asked, not the question that was actually asked.
That's very frustrating for journalists.
I know. Well, in such a way that because you go on there, your purpose, honestly, think about it this way. And I know this is going to sound cynical perhaps to some people, but if you are a candidate for office and you go and sit down for an interview with a potentially hostile interviewer, you are there to promote your own candidacy and to win voters. And so in that way, you want to talk about what you want to talk about. You don't necessarily want to talk about, nor should you have to talk about, what the interviewer wants to talk about. You are the candidate. You ought to be able to, in some way, control what comes out of your own mouth. So, it's easier said than done in some cases, but I think those are the sorts of things that.
And what advice could you give to a candidate who has a checkered, colourful personal life? Because obviously none of us are perfect, and there seems to be, is there more tolerance in Western society today for people who have flawed characters? It seems to me that there is. It used to be the case that even in the UK, for example, if a politician had a one-night stand or whatever, that was grounds for resignation. But am I right in thinking that people are more tolerant now of imperfection?
I don't know if it's more tolerance or anything, but I think it probably has something to do with the recognition that people are people, and that I don't think there's anyone walking among us yet who has lived a perfect life. And so I think no matter who you are, whatever candidate you are, the people who you're trying to get to vote for you are really interested in what's best in their own lives. And I think if you're talking about matters of public policy, people want to know, what does it mean for me and my family? I think it's populism really, and I think it's what has settled into American politics a lot right now, and and you're still seeing it. I think the media is rerunning the same right now. They're rerunning the same campaign that they just lost in November. They lost. The media lost. There's no question they lost. But they're still running the same thing. They haven't gotten the message, and it's because they don't know where the populace is. The populace cares about. And basically, the main message that I think the American people told the media and everyone else in the country is that the federal government had lost touch with the people it's trying to serve and did not understand any longer what people were worried about in their own personal lives, and in fact, that the people had become servants of the government instead of the other way around, that the government was supposed to service the people. That's what people care about. And if you get focused on personalities and things like that, then you're looking at the wrong things, because that's not what voters care about, and I don't care who the candidate is.
I'm thinking, for example, about Clinton and the joint he smoked when he. You remember this story?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And then he said, I didn't inhale this.
Right.
I mean, that seems like quite a petty story today.
I mean, that's looking backwards 3 decades, or how 1992,
Right,
I guess,
yeah,
in that vicinity. Sure. I mean, it almost seems quaint now, right? But yeah, I like, but times change, politics changes. They're used, but if you go back centuries, and people talk about the hostile press, and I think the press is hostile these days. There's no question about it. But if you look back at the times in America, I don't know. It probably is similar. I know the British tabloids are, as well known for their gentility, right? Yeah,
that was a joke.
That was a joke. Yeah, but going back a couple of centuries, and to look at what the American press was like in the 19th and 18th and 19th centuries, where they would just savage the candidates for president in America, just the most vicious personal attacks on character and everything else. I mean, if you go back and read some of that stuff in the editorials and the cartoons, and you think, my God, it was unbelievable. I would say even worse than some of the things you see today. Okay. So it's funny. The trends come and go, but it is interesting that what everyone thought was such a significant thing of Bill Clinton claiming to have only smoked one joint but not inhaled, right? Then. I don't think that's where we're at today, I would say.
Okay, 2 more topics and then we'll wrap it up. The first one is, this is your first time in Brussels,
correct?
Correct?
Yes.
And you've been, in addition to our event where you met a few people, you've been to the European Parliament. Mm-hmm. What are your first impressions, and can you draw any parallels between Brussels and Washington?
Yeah, a lot, really. First, Brussels is very much a government town. It feels like that. There's lots of government buildings. The EU Parliament's presence is massive here. And so it's in Washington, D.C., which is also sort of an international city. But it's very obviously the seat of the American government. So it kind of has the same sort of city feel to me as Washington does. But in my conversations with the members of Parliament that I was privileged enough to meet with over the course of the last couple of days, and I'm talking to people from France and Denmark and Belgium and Austria, and I'm sure I'm leaving someone out, but lots of Sweden. Different countries, and almost, I think it was consistent. Every single conversation, of course, there are economic concerns, which was very prevalent and probably the lead issue in the presidential race in America just now, the economy and inflation and all that. Most of our advertising was about that. But a secondary issue for us was, not secondary, it was President Trump believes that it was the most prominent issue, and he's probably right, that it was number one, was illegal immigration, which is control of our own border in the United States and the damages that it has caused both to violence in the American communities because of criminals that have come in, but also it's an economic hardship as well to the people who are already there legally to have others come in and be competing in the marketplace and all that, and driving wages down and so on. And in here, there's different terminology when you're talking about it. It's always referred to as migration in my recent, very limited experience. Mm-hmm. But every conversation that I had with members of Parliament, of the EU Parliament, migration and what to do about violence that has now begun to erupt in communities, and how to handle it and how to talk about it, and how it's a political issue and how to handle that in the campaign. And, I think among some of the people that I was talking to, there is at least a little bit of trepidation about it, in that there is a feeling that if you talk about the problem of migration too forcefully, you will be called a racist. And so it is very difficult to even raise it as a political issue because there is a fear of being labeled as such, as a racist. Well, I mean, it's a problem, and there's no question that it's a problem. And, you know, in the Trump era, we don't worry what the New York Times says about us. By God, illegal immigration is a problem. Illegal aliens are a problem. And I don't care if the New York Times thinks it's impolite to talk about it. It's a problem. And I think that is a little bit of a hurdle that most everybody is getting over. But it's interesting. It's almost an exact parallel. Of course, there are economic issues at stake, but there's also migration, as referred to here, and a very, very similar
theme.
Very similar, yeah.
Did the offices feel the same?
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I felt like among
atmosphere.
kindred. Yeah, I felt of kindred spirits, and we're like, all right, you know, how do we go about talking about this? And I know the parliamentary system is entirely different. Where in America we have to get to win an election, unless it's a multi-candidate. It depends on the election rules in certain states, but generally speaking, you have to get 50% plus one vote to win and be able to control. The parliamentary system, of course, is different. People are talking about getting from 24% to 27%, and that makes a huge difference. And so it's a whole different approach. It's much more about coalition building. I think another parallel was President Trump built this incredible coalition that allowed him to win the 2024 election. Of course, it begins with the MAGA crowd, Make America Great Again crowd, the America First movement, conservatives, Republicans, even establishment Republicans, some of the more, going back like Bush Republicans, I guess you would call it, those that stayed in the camp. But then also, President Trump has really shifted the center of gravity in the Republican Party because of his populist message and a very successful populism, adding organized labor, union members, and not the executive boards of the unions and the union leaders and the union presidents, but the union members, the workers themselves. The Teamsters, which is this massive union in the United States, they always endorse the Democrat candidate for president, always. Except this time, they announced very abruptly and to great fanfare that they were staying neutral and not endorsing anyone, which was a huge blow to Kamala Harris to not receive their endorsement. Huge blow. But then they took it a step further even, and they released their own internal polling, state by state, of their membership, of the Teamsters membership. And in states that are more industrialized states where they have heavy membership there, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, states like that, the numbers that they released were staggering, 65 to 35 of their membership in favor of Trump. And so basically they endorsed Trump without having to do it, without doing it, because by releasing that polling information, they showed that their membership was supporting Trump. So that's part of the coalition. He did much better among black voters than anyone has done by a Republican in a long time. Democrats thought they were going to swamp him in the women's vote because of the abortion issue. He won white women. He won the Latino vote, according to a lot of exit polls. Just a massive coalition. Even if you look at the conflict in Gaza, he got an increased vote share for Republicans among Jewish voters, and he was also endorsed by Muslim imams in certain Dearborn, Michigan, because of just by being straightforward and honest that he just wanted the Gaza conflict to end. So he won votes of people on both sides of the Gaza conflict. This coalition is unbelievable, and so that in my conversations with members of Parliament. And they're talking about trying to grow coalitions in the parliamentary system. How do you reach instead of trying to attract voters to you where you already are with your issue set, you can expand your issue set to go reach the voters where they are. Mm-hmm. Instead of bringing them to you, you go to them. Mm-hmm. And the trick is, if you're expanding on this side, and if we're doing this visually, if you're expanding on this side, you also need to do that while not losing the ones you already have over here. Like that. You don't want to shift the whole center of gravity because then you're losing the ones over here. So that's the trick. Yeah. How do you actually expand it? Okay. And so the conversations like that I thought were fascinating. But it's about coalition building, and I think we did. President Trump is a great example of how you can do that. It's not easy, by God, and he pulled it off, and no one's ever done it before. So it's like we refer to this election as a black swan election because it's an extreme rarity, but he proved that it can be done.
Well, if you want to see more on Tim's thoughts on Trump's election campaign, we're going to put the presentation he gave yesterday up online separately. But I want to change subject for my final question. Talk a bit about your book, please, Tim. Why did you write it and what's it about? I only found out about it yesterday.
Well, it's called Swing Hard in Case You Hit It. And the subtitle is something like My Escape from Addiction and Shot at Redemption on the Trump campaign. For a long time, many decades, I had a terrible problem with alcohol. I had many brushes with the law. I had 2 driving under the influence convictions in America. And I was really on a dead-end path to a loss of my family, my career, and probably ultimately my life. I was a terrible dead-end alcoholic, really very bad.
Does that mean you were drinking in the morning?
24 hours a day.
Okay.
I got to a certain point where if my blood alcohol level dropped below a certain level, I would get sick. I would feel sick and withdraw, and it was terrible, awful. I had been in and out of rehab, I think 5 times at least. I actually lost track of how many times I went to different rehabs. It was my friends and family were about at the end of their ropes with me and didn't know what to do. And I got in trouble one more time. I was on probation. This is the story about why ultimately I decided how I got sober and then why I ultimately decided to write a book about it. I was on probation for my second of 2 DUIs. And during the probation period...
Driving under the influence.
Yes, driving under the influence. And I got arrested again for another drunken public charge, which is a lesser charge, but but because it was an alcohol-related offense, as minor as it was, it would trigger a probation violation, and I was going to have to go and serve the remainder of a sentence. I had already served 10 days in jail for the second DUI, 5 days for the first one, 10 days in jail for the second one, but I had 80 days of a suspended sentence still hanging over my head. I got sentenced to 90 days. I served 10, had 80 suspended. And if I had gotten convicted of that drunken public charge, I would have had to go serve the other 80 days. And it would have been the end of everything. That's basically 3 months in jail. I would have lost my job, certainly, and forget about the job, my career. I was working on Capitol Hill in Washington at the time for Congress. And it would have been the end of everything. And I got a lawyer, and he gave me some really good advice, and I went and did a bunch of I went to an outpatient rehab. I voluntarily had the ignition thing put on my car. We have to blow into a hose to start the car. It won't start unless you have no alcohol in your system, right? And I went and did volunteer at an animal shelter, like 50 hours of volunteer work leading, and I went to court and basically threw myself on the mercy of the court, and my lawyer managed to get them to not prosecute that case in exchange for continued good behavior. And so I did not have to serve the 80 days. I did not lose everything, and I never had another drink again. And that was May 16th, 2015. So it's coming up on 10 years now. And while through the many times that I was in rehab, I used to go to the bookstore all the time, and I would read a lot because they have lots of different like medical type biology books talking about the physiology of addiction and all that stuff. And you go sit through lots of lectures while you're in there about what's happening, the way the body reacts to substances and how we're different because we're addicted to it than normies, normal people. And those books were fine. But I loved the ones that were more autobiographical, where people told their own stories about it. And I decided that if I ever wrote a book, that I would write one like that, because those are the ones that I devoured when I was in rehab. And so what my book is it's half stories from inside the 2020 Trump campaign, and it's half stories of my journey through terrible alcoholism and ultimately to recovery. And it alternates chapters back and forth. There's one drinking chapter, and then there's one sober chapter, and it tells the story sort of flipping back and forth between the timelines. And it also had the added benefit, when I first got hired by the Trump campaign in 2019, leading up to the 2020 campaign, I knew that this was a likelihood. And I had warned everybody about what my past was like and what people would find if they went looking, the police records and so forth. And sure enough, and President Trump was aware of it, and I had served in his administration also and had a security clearance and had undergone an FBI background check and all that. And so I was completely open about where I had come from. But political opponents don't know any of that, and they don't care. So they went and found, these opposition researchers went and found my police records and were shopping them around to reporters. the New York Post and some of the more tabloidy, ones. Some of the more, the Daily Mail, for example, was another one. Things that people who would more sensationalize it, and they were trying to say that Trump had just hired this communications director who had all these alcohol-related arrests, and they were trying to damage him by shopping a story about me, right? And thankfully, we were able to convince all the reporters, like this is not relevant. This is years in the past. Okay. If this had happened right now during the campaign, then sure, you'd have a point. But this was ancient history, basically. And so we managed to keep those stories from being written. But I thought, you know what? I'm just going to own it myself. If I write a book about all this stuff, then no one can ever hold it against me again and threaten me with it. Right. Because if somebody ever says, you know what, I heard you had a couple, and I'm saying, yeah, as a matter of fact, I wrote a book about it. Here, why don't you? Yeah. So that's it. It's called Swing Hard in Case You Hit It. And
was there a low point, one that comes to mind? I mean, there must have been lots. But is there one?
Well, the waking up in jail, because I got arrested that day that I got arrested for drunk in public in 2015, which was going to trigger the 80-day sentence, as I just described. Waking up in jail, and I had come to. I didn't wake up as much as I came to. You just sort of come out of the fog, and you really look around and realize, and you think, oh, not again. And so it was just another occasion where I came to in jail. But then it dawned on me that this time I was in really big trouble because I had those 80 days hanging over my head, and this was probably going to do it. And so, yeah, that was a low point.
And was there a turning point that you can identify?
That's it.
That was a day where you thought, right, that's it.
That's it. Yeah, because I needed everybody comes to it their own way. If they ever do. A lot of people never do come to it. Right. But I needed to be faced with certain and complete personal destruction.
Okay.
That was it. And, because you skirted or got close to it a couple of times and terribly, terribly inconvenienced, and it was embarrassing and all that stuff. But after a little while, you get over it, and you're right back to the same routine again. Well, this was a kick in the teeth. Like, there's no coming back from this. Okay. If you don't...
Staring into the abyss.
Yeah, if you don't turn around at this moment. If you don't stop there's no, I'll go have a drink and think about it. Yeah. No, it had right then. It had to be right then.
And any tips or techniques you used? There must have been...
Well, I went to a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. A lot. Along the way, some of them court-ordered, some not. But I went and got a sponsor, and I worked the 12 steps, as people say. And what helped me a lot? The very simple thing. In times when I even got away from going to AA meetings, and I'm sorry to admit, I don't go to a lot of AA meetings now, but I do still rely on some of the techniques and habits that I learned there. And at a fantastic rehab place that I went to in Maryland in the United States called Father Martin's Ashley, and it was a fantastic place. But the Serenity Prayer is a very simple thing, and I think I use it. I was teaching it to my kids, as a matter of fact. Anytime they get frustrated about something, it gives you a moment to step back. It's a very simple prayer, and it sort of just reorders your thoughts. It's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Yeah. The courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So there are some things that you have control of, some things you don't have control over. Take a step, take a second, and think about which one is which, and you learn to know what you can control and what you can't control, and just accept it.
And how did it start? Was it a cultural thing where you were working in an environment where everyone went drinking? Or?
No, I mean, certainly that contributed to it, because I was a journalist first, and there's a lot of drinking that went on, and then in politics there's a lot of it. But I think I was predisposed to it. I think a lot of people have it in their genetic. I'm Irish, and
addictive personality.
Addictive personality, but also I think in genetics, and there are certain people in certain cultures where it is more prevalent, and I believe that's true. I think I had it. Other members of my family have had it.
Okay.
And so, I think it does run in families and it runs in cultures, and I think there's a large part of it that's genetic. And I don't think, not everyone is genetically predisposed to it. I believe I was. But it's something that can develop. And one thing I did learn is that even in the periods of time when you are not drinking or using whatever substance it is that people use, but in my case it was drinking, and they told us this in rehab, and it didn't make sense for a while, that even if you stop, your addiction is still there. You're not feeding it anymore, but it's still there, and it's actually still getting worse while you're not drinking, your addiction is still getting stronger. And so it's always on an upward swing, whether you're drinking or not. So that if you ever do return to drinking, your addiction you're going to join it at a higher level than you were before. So they would tell us while you're in rehab, hey, while you're in here for these 28 days, your addiction is out in the parking lot doing push-ups. And when it's out there, when you leave this place, it's out there ready for you, and it's stronger than it was before. And I found that to be true, because every time I left rehab and almost immediately returned to drinking, it was worse than when I had gone in. And it's because it's a progressive disease, and it always gets worse, and it never gets better. The only way to escape it is to stop completely.
Which has been 10 years now.
Almost coming up on 10 years.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for coming to the Brussels Signal studio.
Oh, it's been a wonderful trip, and I thank Brussels Signal for everything that they've been very, very great, hospitable hosts.
Thank you very much, and thanks for watching.